Okay, hello. Lights up. All right. So welcome. So thank you very much, Ambassador Geoffrey. Very interesting to hear what you had to say, and thank you very much for joining us today. So I would just like to introduce this panel, panel 4, but also there's panel 5 happening, Energy Diversification in Southeast Europe, next door in Crystal Hall 2. So if you're in the wrong room, that's okay. We won't be offended if you have to get up to leave. But this panel here is EU enlargement in new geopolitical circumstances, how to use the new impetus. And on here it says that the panel is Klemen, Groselj, Luka, Steric, Yvette, Szepesi, Srdjan, Majstorovic, and Nikola, Burazer. So thank you all very much. I'm missing one, but I will slip away now and let the panel begin. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon from my side. It's nice to see a full house, especially after lunch. And we are here now gathered to discuss one of the most burning issues at the moment, which is the EU perspective of the Western Balkans in the context of changing geopolitical circumstances and security threats to Europe, which we're witnessing this year. As you may know, the Russian aggression on Ukraine on 24th of February has drastically changed geopolitical circumstances and brought serious security concerns for the entire European continent. Conventional warfare has returned to Europe after several decades, and nobody can really exclude even the possibility of a nuclear war. In these circumstances, the enlargement process has found itself in the last years in a sort of a stalemate. Different issues such as the problems with rule of law and democracy in the countries themselves, bilateral issues between countries in the region and between countries in the region and EU member states, as well as the apparent lack of appetite for enlargement among EU member states have put this process into question. Coming into 2022, we have actually seen how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has opened up a new debate about EU enlargement, about the importance of the Western Balkans for European security and stability, and reinvigorated the debate about what needs to be done with enlargement to make the process successful at the end. So it has brought some opportunities, on the one hand, by opening up this debate and by elevating the Western Balkans in the security sense. But at the same time, it has brought, I would say, serious security challenges to the region and therefore brought into question the security and stability of the region itself. So if we look at this entire context, could we say that these new geopolitical circumstances, tragic as they are opportunity for the Western Balkan countries, or another obstacle that we have to face now on our way or in our dream to join the European Union one day? Let me begin with this first general question. Did the new geopolitical circumstances represent opportunity or an obstacle, or maybe both? Mr. Steric, let's begin with you.
Thank you, Nikola, and I would like to welcome everybody from BCSP team, from the side of the BCSP team to the conference. So I would start with the conventional wisdom, which is that this new geopolitical framework, as difficult as it is, has opened some new possibilities for the Western Balkans by bringing the spotlight back on the region, which has been neglected for more than 10 years, at least. But I would I would leave it for the other speakers to speak about opportunities, because I think that there's a major concern to tackle here, and this is the fact that this geopolitical circumstances would put geopolitical interests and concerns on top of the European agenda when it comes to the approach to the region, and therefore a continuation or even empowerment of what we have seen for the last 10 years at least, and this is the dominant European approach when it comes to the region, and this is the so-called stabilocracy support, or the political support to stabilocracy. And by stabilocracy, what I mean is this approach in which EU has turned a blind eye to lack of reforms and even democratic backsliding in many of the countries of the Western Balkans, effectively putting enlargement on hold, and supporting, passively at least, the status quo in exchange for some type of stability and for European presence or actually European influence to be the dominant one in the region. And I think this approach has led, or actually contributed greatly to a region becoming less secure, actually, less democratic, and European influence fading in the region over the last decade. And by less secure, I think we are facing probably the most serious security dangers since the 1990s, at least, within this region across the board. We also see democratic backsliding to a various extent in many of the countries of the region, probably with Serbia as the captured state, I would say, on top of this list. And finally, we have seen the EU credibility and legitimization of the EU agenda fading in the eyes of much of the public in the Western Balkans, especially the ones, and I think this is important, of those who are the most pro-European, actually, in these societies. And I think long-term, this presents major challenges for the EU influence in the region, and also, of course, about the whole idea of EU enlargement as a whole. And I think, to finish with this, we need a new approach, which would put, once again, but truthfully, reforms in the center and actually see if we can enhance the EU enlargement process once again as a force of democratization of rule of law reforms.
Thank you very much. Mr. Majstorovic, what are your observations and maybe comments to what Mr. Steric said?
Well, let me start by saying a big thank you to Belgrade Center for Security Studies for keeping the torch alive and for keeping Belgrade on the map of big conferences dedicated to important issues. And my answer very shortly would be we need to snap out of this kind of a small town mentality that is very present in the region. It seems that we are looking at a Russian aggression on Ukraine exclusively through the lenses of our region. While I think that what is going in Ukraine is much larger. It's a joint and common threat to common future. And as such, I see this, how to put it, repulsive atrocities which are going on in Ukraine as a signal of what Europe might be if we do not put our strategic hats on and start thinking of what Ambassador Geoffrey was saying, and this is thinking about a common future and common Europe in the next 50 years. The war in Ukraine is the war against rights to self-determination. It's a war against people's rights to decide about their destinies. And as such, it's much larger than just taking a snippet point of view on this phenomenon as a opportunity or risk. It's a challenge, and it's a common challenge. As such, the Western Balkan countries have to find a way how to actually contribute to resolution of this conflict. First and utmost, sitting in the capital of Serbia, it would be important that the new government adopt the decision finally to harmonize its foreign policy with the EU common and foreign policy in general. This is becoming one of the fundamental issues in the EU integration process in general, and it needs to be said very clearly and loudly that those who are not capable of playing the team game and feeling the spirit of the moment are going to have a very tough time joining the club. And I'll stop here because I know you wanted this to be a very dynamic exchange, so let's keep it like that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Szepesi, you come from a member state which is usually accused of being skeptical when it comes to enlargement. We have heard now, actually, also from Mr. Geoffrey, that there is this unity within the European Union when it comes to addressing the Russian aggression on Ukraine. But could we say that now there is a newfound cohesion and unity among your member states when it comes to enlargement in the Western Balkans as well? This is the impression we get in the last few months, but do you share the same impression?
Yeah, I think I would share that impression. First of all, thank you very much as well for inviting me to this interesting discussion. I would fully agree with the EU ambassador about the EU unity that has been demonstrated since the war started, and that it's quite exceptional and also maybe a momentum for this region. We've seen how the EU reacted to Ukraine in full support and also full solidarity. We've seen how the EU has reacted to Russia with firm and strict sanctions that are unprecedented. And we've seen how most of the countries in this region have aligned with the EU common foreign and security policy and have stood behind both Ukraine and the EU in this awful war. So I think looking at this region, this EU unity has also been translated to the region and to the interest of the EU in the region, I would say. And this is an opportunity for the region to increase the work together and to increase, working towards enlargement together. Because now it's very clear that this European family, this idea of, oh, we're in this together on this continent and we are facing together this awful crisis, is a momentum to really engage and speed up the process and make sure that this family becomes tighter and more close. So I think we can use enlargement to do so. I fully agree with you as well that the reforms have been lagging behind, so we have to continue to focus on that. But there's definitely a new momentum, and we feel it as a member state, we feel it in terms of EU unity, but we also feel it in terms of the political debate in the Netherlands, as well as in how society looks at the EU, but also at enlargement, I would say.
Thank you very much. Let us turn to Mr. Groselj, who is joining us online. Namely, you're a member of the European Parliament, which is known to be quite vocal about the importance of enlargement, basically, and has been so in recent years. What is your impression? Is now a new opportunity? Is there now this newfound focus on enlargement, at least when it comes to the European Parliament and the parties represented there? Or nothing has substantially changed in this turbulent year?
Thank you for having me, even though in this remote fashion. I do apologize, but my agenda didn't allow me to be physically present in this very important conference. So, does the Ukrainian war means a new opportunity? I would say there are opportunities, obstacles, and let's say also risks and dangers regarding the enlargement of the European Union to the Western Balkans. Of course, there is absolutely the first and the most important thing to which needs to be pointed out is that there is a political understanding among the member states and institutions that we need to do something regarding the Western Balkans, not to allow other global and regional players to take over the whole story and cause us problems. But this something is not yet finally defined. I see that the Commission, and this is, I would say, a very positive development, has stepped in with some initiatives like the proposing the candidate status for the Bosnia and Herzegovina, getting a little bit more involved, which is evident from the President von der Leyen's engagement in these days in the Kosovo, Albania, and Serbia. But of course, there are some questions which are not yet answered, and this is in regard, will this unity which is now established regarding the Ukrainian war and the Russian aggression, will this be translated and reflected to the Western Balkans? Some signs are saying yes, there are also signs saying no. I would say the obstacle, of course, one of the obstacles which might occur is that focus of the European Union and also the international community is now on developments in the so-called Eastern Partnership, because they are the most intensive developments from the geopolitical and geostrategic point of view. What are the risks? We are not talking about the risks. One of the risks is that we could get caught in the geopolitical trap, which would mean that there will be some sort of appeasement, which was already mentioned in a little bit different form. What I mean by appeasement, that's the political interest of, let's say, some of our member states and also our allies would be just to have a stable situation in the Western Balkans, not to allow, let's say, Russia to destabilize it, and not taking into regard the issues which are crucial for the enlargement and for the accession of the Western Balkans country into European Union. These are issues mostly related not that much to the economic development, even though this is supported by the part of the Commission, especially by one commissioner. If we are a little bit frank, and of course the question of basic values, rule of law, democratic development, and backsliding in this sense is evident in the region. And the other trap, I would say, is that there is the question of returning when the war will drag on, returning back to the business as usual. And in this sense, nothing happened in the Western Balkans. Let it stay this way. And this is one of the risks I think we are underestimating. But I would say that despite all these challenges in front of us, I'm still more optimistic about the enlargement process as it was in 2019 when I started dealing this in the political field.
Thank you very much. I believe we have all agreed here that the security threat has kind of elevated the importance of the Western Balkans, but we have heard here an argument that is actually not a good thing for enlargement. So you have mentioned stabilitocracy as a phenomenon, and the usual argument of stabilitocracy goes that it's basically a principle of dealing with the Western Balkan countries in the way to prioritize stability over reforms that are actually going to bring EU integration. Do you believe that now we're seeing some kind of a new momentum, like a new form of stabilitocracy, where there actually is going to be EU enlargement, but under different rules? With prioritization of maybe foreign policy alignment and security, let's say, alignment, but not caring so much about rule of law and democracy once again?
Yeah, there are actually, I think, two sides to this story. One would be to have some kind of incentives for countries to align geopolitically with the EU, and not giving them actually an open door to actually enlarge in the long run. So in this sense, the whole idea of the accession process as a reform process was from the very beginning that incentives have to be connected to the reforms in the rule of law. If you have some other incentive, such as the geopolitical incentive, then taking the place of the rule of law reforms, then this might incentive actually countries of the region to go forward with the business as usual, which is in this case with a democratic backsliding, and in return to just geopolitically align as a non-member. And I'm afraid we can discuss about this later, that maybe European political community might be one of these, ideas. The other version would be to include the region solely based on the geopolitical alignment, regardless of the reforms are actually non-functioning democracies as we see them now. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, because I think that EU members are, regardless of the geopolitical risks, not willing to accept non-functional democracies in their scope. Nonetheless, even if it would happen, I think that would be bad news both for the EU in the long run and also for the citizens of the region, because the whole allure of the accession process from the very beginning was that it can be the driver of democratization and the agent of the change in the region. And if it's just a matter of joining the club and becoming, maybe to be quite direct, New Hungary in the team, then maybe that's not really good news either for the citizens of the Western Balkans.
Mm-hmm. Well, the name of our event is actually linking authoritarianism with war, and could we say that the events in Ukraine have actually put an alarm bell to the European Union to understand better the dangers of authoritarianism? So basically, how can this now affect EU's policy on the region? Like, is the EU going to be less tolerant to autocracy after witnessing what happened in Ukraine after the Russian invasion?
I mean, we would hope so, but I mean, we have to notice that for the last 10 years or so, EU is not. I mean, EU was not, out like it was present in the region. It has followed the changes that were happening. I don't think that EU has been, without eyes being open for a long time. And regardless of this, I mean, we have seen statements of many EU officials, member states, but both member states and the EU level, some kind of a, legitimization and support for stabilitocracy regimes, which were very often authoritarian, concretely about, for example, Serbian regime. So in that sense, I don't think this is much of news. Maybe it will be alarm bell on what can happen long term if you support this kind of system. So let's see, maybe, I mean, this might be an agent of change within the EU about thinking about the enlargement process in general. This is our hope, at least.
Thank you. Mr. Majstorovic, how do you see this? Is this new stabilitocracy or some kind of changed stabilitocracy a danger for the Western Balkans, having in mind the focus on stability and security after the Russian invasion?
Well, answer could be very short. Yes, of course. There is a risk. And we need to be very open at the gatherings like this, where we are coming from different sides. We need to be very open that, unfortunately, in a time of security crisis, issues regarding functioning democratic institutions, certain controls, are sometimes being jeopardized for the sake of security. And that could be a very dangerous trap that the region can step in. And obviously, nobody would like to go that way, but the events will basically decide what's going to happen. How to mitigate this risk is to be persistent in the narrative that has to be very clear and open. We're witnessing these days in Serbia especially that the highest officials are saying if we resolve issues with Kosovo, we could become a member state the next day. It's simply not the truth. It's not either Kosovo, either human rights, either democracy. It's resolvement of Kosovo issue and democracy. And that needs to be communicated each and every time the high-level officials are visiting Serbia. There are some also strategic EU policies which might contribute to what we are saying here, and this is to create a sort of an atmosphere for democracy, democratic practices. Recently, the European Commission has published communication on raw materials, where again, certain raw material which apparently is very present in this country is being put on the top of priorities. That could also be a side interest that could influence democratic processes in this region. So we need to remain vigilant, and we need to remain true to what was written in the book of negotiations, in the framework for the accession talks with Serbia, which says democracy, rule of law, democratic institutions, freedom of speech, free media, resolution of Kosovo issue. From the day one, these conditions are there. They're not changed. And I must say, I was very surprised to hear the old new prime minister saying that some of these conditions are new, that they're changing, and that sometimes they're simply rude towards Serbia. This is the product of how to put it, an unclear narrative and messages that needs to constantly be sent to the countries in the region. So there is no choice, there is no accession a la carte. I will contribute to this and not to this. And this is why the whole process needs to be taken back to its root, to regain the transformative power, to have this transactional nature. If you do good, you're going to be rewarded for that. If you do not progress, then you might get punished for that. In order to make the cost, the price of non-compliance with the requirements, which are clear, as I said, from the day one of the accession talks, very high and politically risky.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ms. Szepesi, you come from a member state which is known to be very strict on rule of law, or at least putting lots of emphasis on the rule of law when it comes to not only enlargement, but actually within the EU itself. Do you believe that this emphasis on security, which we see right now, can lead to some shortcuts for membership of the Western Balkan countries, or no shortcuts can actually be made and basically the rules and the requirements remain the same?
No, I would say no shortcuts on the rule of law. We believe that enlargement should actually strengthen the EU. And how do you do that? That is by adding to the EU full-fledged democracies that have a solid rule of law base. And then I think the EU could be strengthened with any of the countries in the Western Balkans joining, hopefully in the near future. But these criteria, they remain the same. And we understand, of course, that there are external challenges now that have increased compared to the past. And of course, it's also very important that future EU members align with common foreign and security policy. This is one of the requirements, and we do expect that from all future EU members, including from Serbia, that is clearly not ready to do that yet. But the fundamentals, the focus on the fundamentals remains the same, and you talked about it in the case of Serbia, but it actually applies to all candidates, of course. We have the Copenhagen criteria at the core of the enlargement process, and as far as we're concerned, that is for a very good reason. And we see what happens if countries slide back, and that has a direct impact on the stability of the region. And that's why we think that these rule of law criteria, they remain at the core. And of course, also in addition to that, we should focus a lot on alignment with common foreign and security policy, with sanctions, with visa policy. Things like that are also very important.
So I think we find ourselves now in a problem. We have all here concluded that it is very important for the European Union to enlarge in the Western Balkans, especially given this security threat that currently exists. But at the same time, we heard, and we can all here concur, that basically the rules can remain the same. The obstacles can remain the same. We still have all the issues we previously had with rule of law. We still have the same requirements when it comes to bilateral issues, so chances for member states to block individual Western Balkan countries. We have the Kosovo issue yet unresolved. We have the foreign policy issue the same way we had before. So we have all the same problems, but now more need to actually complete the enlargement process. So the question is, how do we deal with this? How do we resolve the problems that we were all unable to resolve in the past 10, 15 years, now that we are all, let's say, more serious about this? Mr. Groselj, looking from the European Parliament, what are your ideas about how to resolve this problem? So how to deal with the fact that the problems are there, that they have proven to be non-resolvable in the last couple of years, but at the same time to actually make the process work?
The answer is very simple and also at the same time very complex. By implementation of the basic values and principles upon which the European Union is based.
But how? That's the question. That's the question.
Yeah, that's very simple. You know, if you want to be member of the European Union, you should not only, I would say, accept the legal framework, but you need to implement it. If you want to implement the foreign policy, the principles of common foreign security policy, then you should do everything possible to resolve your open issues with your neighboring countries on the principles on which the European Union is based upon. You know, this can be also a challenge for the member states. There are some issues, you know, also between Slovenia and Croatia, but there is solution. We accepted some solution. At the end, it was not, let's say, accepted completely, but at the end, we have mechanisms which are available. So the countries in the Western Balkans could simply take the same mechanisms for resolving their bilateral issues. On the other hand, this is also the political issue. The political issue is how will the politics in the Western Balkans slowly change from the politic based primarily on the nationalistic issues to more issues which are relevant for the well-being of the people in the Western Balkans. You know, if you have political parties which exclusive issue is how to issue some more or less, I would say, national identity issues which should be already solved, and if this is the only political program they have, then you have a problem, you know, because when you are entering the process of negotiation, there are several topics. You have clusters which are not obstacles, but they are conditions which aim is not to prevent someone from entering the European Union, but for making the candidate country more adept to entering common market, common internal market, common rule-based system of decision-making, and all the benefits which made the European Union one of the most developed and still the most attractive part of the of the world. And by doing this, the precondition is very simple. You need to have a functional democracy. Because we saw what happened with Hungary and also to a certain extent with Poland. But this is something which is not acceptable because Europe is based on democratic ideas. Because Europe was established after learning the lessons in a very hard way. What I'm afraid is that in the Western Balkans, some political forces, especially in Serbia, are still caught in the politics of the past, and since they don't have the solutions for the problems, either economic one, either social or demographic, they are returning back to the politics of the past. But in reality, what modern politics needs to address is the issues which are faced by the society. So I think that there are many other issues, and if these are addressed, then the process of enlargement or also negotiation will be quite smooth and quite quicker, also in the Western Balkans. But this is internal political process. It was the same in Slovenia. We had to go through the same process, figuring out how to place. And when you figure out this on political level, then you have the solution how to do this negotiation the best possible way for your country as a candidate country.
But what can we do with the EU enlargement process to motivate or pressure all the relevant actors to change their behavior? So to motivate the Western Balkan governments to actually implement the necessary reforms, to prevent EU member states from using bilateral disputes to block enlargement, also to prevent EU member states from stopping enlargement due to some of their own internal issues, as happened in previous years when it comes to North Macedonia. So do we need to reform the system? Is the system broken? Do we maybe need some kind of a new discussion about enlargement? Some let's say new fora for discussing it. So what is the resolution to this?
I would say the only answer is a political will. Look, we are talking about this Bulgarian blockade of Northern Macedonia. This happened to Slovenia also. Italy was blocking Slovenia for a certain amount of time. So what is the lesson learned? There will always be this kind of things happening in the negotiation process. What is essential is to find a solution. Despite of the very dig-in position of both sides, and especially the Bulgarian side, at the end, the European Union found a way to overcome this blockade. Because both sides at a certain point understood that, especially the Bulgarian one, which was quite stubborn, let's be frank, understood that at a certain point, if you are blocking someone negotiation process, it is damaging your own position. This is what is the balance system which is working in the European Union. But what is the major issue for the Western Balkans is that, look, the implementation of what is agreed is not done in a sincere way. You know, the problem is you have laws which are similar to the laws which apply to the European Union or to European Union member states. But how you implement the laws, that's another issue. And in the Western Balkans, the problem is that these laws are not implemented in the way to bring the country closer to the European Union, but are used to fortify the existing power structures in the country. That's the problem. One of the solutions might be, and this is one of the ideas which I'm quite promoting, is let's start with a sort of transferring good practices from the European Union to the candidate countries. For example, European Public Prosecutor's Office is a very successful tool in protecting the financial interests of the European budget and public money. So let's apply this mechanism also for the candidate countries, related at the beginning only to the funds coming from the European Union. I think this would make a huge change. It will change the nature of the judiciary in the candidate countries. It will change the way how the judiciary in those countries is working. And this will be one of the change which might at the end also change the political culture in the candidate countries. This is a huge step, I would say. I know that it will be faced with a huge resistance from the candidate countries, but this is one of the steps which might be taken or should be taken to enhance the enlargement process, because this will bring also insurance to those member state countries which are reluctant to accept the enlargement, because the corruption issues related to organized crime is one of the topics which is closely internal politically related to the enlargement process. And this is, I would say, a solution which answers to many questions at once.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Groselj. Let's go back to the physical panel here, Srdjan.
Yeah, I'd like to agree what Klemen said, but I would like to add one element that I missed, and this is there is no exclusive guilt that can be awarded exclusively to the candidate countries. We are witnessing the crisis of trust, and this crisis of trust lasts now for years. So it is obvious that answering to your question, what is required is not just enlargement of the EU, but it's deepening that needs to be done simultaneously. And this is why this is so difficult and complex, because it's very difficult to persuade the candidate countries to behave in a certain way if these requirements are coming from a club that doesn't hold to its own rules. Until the countries which are jeopardizing the rules and values of the very club are free to do what they want, they're creating a perfect alibi for the candidate countries to see, but why should I change if this is the model of behavior within the EU? So it's quite obvious that the enlargement debate needs to be held hand in hand with the deepening of the EU debate, discussing how to change the decision-making rules, how to adjust it in order to deliver certain rights and demand certain obligations from the members. That would create a better atmosphere and better understanding. And we need to have a common agenda for that. We need to set the time, and we need to set it on a paper. We need a common agenda of how to integrate Europe until 2030. To write it down next year, it's a perfect opportunity, 20th anniversary of the Thessaloniki summit, when the whole Western Balkan enlargement project was started. It's an excellent opportunity to reset the trust, to rediscover the trust, and put on paper what is required on this process in order to start building a confidence on both sides. It's a strategic interest of both sides. But we need to have a common understanding what does enlargement and deepening means at this moment for Europe, for European Union, and for the future member states.
We have had some proposals in recent years, even before 2022, about how to reform the enlargement process, how to also reform decision-making process in the European Union to make enlargement more successful. One of these ideas that comes as well from the European Policy Center is the so-called stage accession project or proposal. What is your opinion about this staged accession proposal? Could it solve some of the issues, at least, that we currently have when it comes to EU enlargement? Could this principle, could this reform bring this kind of motivation to Western Balkan countries to focus more on their EU path than is currently the case?
Yes, but exclusively if there is a common understanding what does it requires. As I said, this is a part of enlargement, but it needs to be coupled with the deepening of the EU at the same moment. The model of staged accession, the template was developed by European Policy Center in Belgrade, but also with our colleagues, shouldn't forget them, from the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels. It does not require changes of the founding treaties. It introduces some bold ideas. I would say this is the most sophisticated model that is currently on the table for discussion. And it aims to address the fears on the both sides. Fears of the EU that newcomers might, sneak in by not respecting certain rules and procedure, and the fears of the candidates that the accession of the EU is so far away that it's not tangible to its citizens. By introducing different stages of the accession to the EU with the clear benefits, obviously based on the very heavy conditionality, with the clear benefits in the sense of participation in the EU policies, even in EU working bodies, with increased financial support to those who are more advanced in order to converge in the economic and social sense. And mind you, this is a serious problem. We are speaking about security, but one of the aspects which is actually influencing the internal security in the region is the economic and social gap that is continuously growing between the EU and the Western Balkan countries. Citizens of Croatia will receive 10 times more from European Union than citizens in Serbia per capita. These are extremely big differences which can cause further economic and social backtracking in the region, which cannot bring anything positive. So in that sense, our model is really trying to address all these issues. It's not easy to perhaps communicate it in a layman's language. It requires a lot of insight in how EU works. But I think it's a good proposal that could be utilized. So we know how. The problem is, are we ready to how now? Are we ready to put the wheels in motion and be serious to each other that we really want the EU to enlarge? Because we are, at this moment, we are having a ripe momentum. We have new candidates. We have opening of the accession talks. But I'm afraid that there is a risk of keeping this form without, and I'm not trying to be cynical, but keeping this form without a substance if we do not change the very model of the EU accession process.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Szepesi, how do you see this proposal for creating a staged accession, basically? In principle, do you think that it could resolve some of the issues we're talking about here? Would it be something that do you think would be a good solution for enlargement in the Western Balkans, and not only Western Balkans, of course?
Well, I think the issue that you addressed before, that the EU has some internal problems and we definitely also have to deal with them, I think that's a very valid point. If you're talking about enlargement, you're talking about political will from both sides, I think as the Netherlands, we're really addressing this internal problem in the EU, and we will continue to do so. And I think we're taking slowly some steps to deepen, indeed, the focus on the values again. But that doesn't mean that the political responsibility is not always also on the side of the candidate countries. I do understand that this blockade that we had with North Macedonia and Albania was very destructive, and it took much too long. And it didn't only have an effect on these two countries, it had an effect on the spirit of enlargement in the region. I think we should recognize that. At the same time, now this blockage has been resolved. It was too late, but at least now there's a solution, and these countries will start with their screening processes, and the negotiations can really take off. And now the ball, I would say, when you're talking about this stalemate in the enlargement process, the ball is really in the court of the candidates again. It's about reforms. It's about difficult choices that political actors need to make about their future. It's about making real tough decisions about who to about fighting corruption and organized crime and put your money where your mouth is. I think the time has come to do that, and there's no obstacles anymore from the Council perspective to really start this agenda of reforms. The Commission reports are very clear. There's some progress here and there, but overall, I think if you look at the fundamentals, it's not going great, and I think there should be more done. And this is really the responsibility of the candidate countries, with the assistance of the EU and bilateral member states like us. I mean, we do help, we do support in these reforms, and we want to continue to do that. So if you're looking at phased accession or staged accession, I don't think the problem is really with the modality. The problem is with the political will to do difficult reforms. So if you change the modalities, if you don't fix that problem, it will probably not change anything. We're happy to talk about phased accession and different modalities, but I think this new methodology that was introduced in 2020 hasn't been fully applied yet. There's multiple possibilities within this new methodology to do more for more, less for less, to imply conditionality, but to also speed up the process. So I would say let's give that a try first with serious commitment before changing the modalities again, because that is not the core of the problem, I would say.
I'll come to you a bit later. I just wanted to recapitulate once again. So we have the problem we have had before about the lack of political will for, let's say, doing the necessary reforms. But at the same time, we have this security gap in the Western Balkans, which is now much more important for the EU itself than it used to be. How do we resolve this? Is the European political community a way to basically integrate these countries in this particular framework, but not basically in the EU? Or there is some other way how to deal with this problem, which we obviously have?
Well, I think the European political community is a nice addition to what we already have. So it's definitely not a replacement of the enlargement process. The enlargement process will continue as it is. But in the European political community, we can discuss broader issues on an equal basis with our friends in the region. And I think this will help probably in the meantime to bring us closer together, in this case with the Western Balkans, and discuss serious issues of concern jointly. But it's, of course, not an alternative for the enlargement process.
Mr. Steric, you wanted to add something to...
Yeah, well, first, let me just briefly comment on what Mr. Groselj said. With all due respect, I think the political and security concerns between Croatia and Slovenia cannot really be compared in the complexity and seriousness with the ones that we are facing in the Western Balkans, just to make this very clear. Second thing is, we can discuss all these models. In the end, it is true, no model can be the substitute for the political will. And of course, the main political agency does come from the candidate countries, absolutely, to do this and to make reforms. Nonetheless, it is also important to see, is there a real credible perspective offered that can incentivize the countries in the region? And when I talk about, and this comes down to the political will of the EU members and EU as a whole. And when you talk about stabilocracy, it's not just an empty word that, a catchphrase. My colleagues and me have just published today a report called Reclaiming the Fundamentals, which actually focuses on the technical and political flaws of the current model of accession, focusing on internal weaknesses of the process itself, the way it can be taken over by the political elites and used for actually state capturing instead, and also about the role of high politics in this whole process and how it can also be misinterpreted or taken to legitimize certain bad practices in the region. So it is also about the model that we offer. And in the end, I would like to say that it's not about maybe accelerating the process itself. Of course, there needs to be a credible perspective. This is the point. Credibility needs to be in the center of this process. And if you have a credible solution, that would be only through the true reforms. And actually, by insisting on reforms themselves in the first place, the EU would actually show serious commitment about the enlargement process being possible, because, as we all agreed, non-functioning democracies will not be accepted to the team. If you really want to see Western Balkans within, you have to insist on reforms within the Western Balkans. And of course, it comes down to both sides when it comes to the political will. But the point is there a will on the political side of the EU decision makers to actually include the Western Balkans, or leave it on the sides and actually use it as a, just to have a geopolitical interest there and keep it kind of secure as we have it at the moment? And this is the key issue for the EU, from thinking about the EU standpoint.
Thank you very much. I would like now to open the floor for questions from the audience. We don't have much time left, but I think we can accept 2 or 3 questions, if there are any. I see one raised hand there. Can somebody bring the microphone? Do we have more questions? Maybe we can pick up 2 or 3 questions and then have them all answered at the same time, or no? Okay. One more hand. So 2. Okay, that's quite doable.
Hello, Mikhailo Samos, New Geopolitical Circumstances Network, Ukraine. I have a question to the panel. What do you think about the not joining, but maybe collaborating between Ukraine, Moldova, and Western Balkans accession enlargement process? I support that all of you that both sides, I mean, European Union and candidates countries should pay more attention on their responsibilities, but I am sure from Ukrainian experience that European Union should play more geopolitical responsibility on transformation. So I remember from Yanukovych time, it was very difficult to expect from Ukrainian authorities to make reforms and do not allow Ukraine to be an association member or association agreement before reforms, but it was easier to propose Ukrainian association agreement and after this demand about reforms. So my question, what do you think about the collaboration and joining maybe process of Western Balkans and Ukraine, Moldova? Because if you're talking about Eastern Partnership program or project, I think that now it doesn't work at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zwiers here.
Thank you very much. My name is Wouter Zwiers from Klingendahl Institute in the Netherlands. I have a question on the European Commission's recommendation of candidate status for Bosnia and Herzegovina. My question is whether the panel sees this as a sign that the EU in this new geopolitical context is taking enlargement serious again and that it is engaged with the region and tries to bring the process forward, or rather that it is a sign of these sort of stabilitocracy dynamics that were discussed in the panel and may actually ignore realities on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have one more question perhaps from the audience? Please, Mr. Dimitrov.
Nikola Dimitrov, the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, and a former foreign minister of North Macedonia. I couldn't agree more with the position that, the job of government today is to deal with the problems of today, of the citizens, and tomorrow. But I don't think it's fair to blame candidate countries for introducing issues, identity politics and historic revisionism. I think the case of North Macedonia and Bulgaria happened the other way around. We had a member state that imposed issues of history and identity on the candidate country. And the other member states couldn't find sort of the political courage around the table to say, we don't do this. Not in this century, not in this European Union. This has nothing to do with the Copenhagen criteria. So now, and I think it's slightly more nuanced. I regret to say it, but I think the problem is actually not solved. But the problem is interlinked with the accession process. And in the negotiating framework, there is a reference to the bilateral protocol that includes the work of historians. So the progress of North Macedonia towards the Union will not be only about fighting corruption and organized crime and aligning the acquis and in all the other areas, but it's going to be also about these historical issues. So I think what we need is, I think we have to be honest about things. It's a shared responsibility and it's a shared stake for a common success. And I think now that we regretfully included issues of history in an accession process, let's do it in the European way. And one way to help is to have some European presence in the room where historians will speak. Because you cannot have it both ways. It cannot be, you cannot make a bilateral issue a European issue, but still refuse a witness in the room. I can say a lot more, but I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask for volunteers to answer to each of the three questions. We don't have much time left, so I would ask you to be brief, like 1 minute per answer. Like, who would like to answer the first question from Mr. Szepesi?
No.
Please, volunteers, okay?
Yes, sure. Fully agree with you that the processes of Ukraine, Moldova, and also Georgia should be combined with the enlargement processes of the Western Balkans. The Commission has already agreed that next year in the progress report and in the enlargement packages, these countries will be included. And I would hope that these countries can learn from each other and stimulate also debate amongst each other. How do you do this, and what can we do to proceed together? So all the same rules apply to all candidates and potential candidates. So it would be good from next year to have that all taken jointly.
Second question from Mr. Srdjan.
On Wouter's question, but it's very closely linked to our Ukrainian colleagues' question as well. If the process doesn't change, then I'm afraid that Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as our newcomer candidate countries, are there for a long ride. And this is what I was referring to when I said that these symbolical gestures are so important at this stage, at this moment in European history, that they got the candidacy status. But if we do not feel the substance in this status issue, I'm afraid that there is a long and bumpy ride that is not going to be to the benefit of citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ukraine, and Moldova. And by the way, there are initiatives which are clearly inviting regional governments to engage more openly, initiatives coming from civil society, to engage much more actively with the governments of Ukraine, Moldova, even Georgia, in order to exchange the experience and to help the newcomers to hit the ground running, ready for what is required. And finally, on Nikola's remark, I fully agree, and this is what I referred when I said that there is a trust that needs to be regained. We don't trust each other at this moment. We don't trust that doors are open, and you do not, I mean you, when I say you, I mean EU 27, do not trust that we are serious about what are requirements to join the EU. And that needs to be mitigated.
May I say something? Or
very briefly, we are already running late.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. On the identity issues, look, what was happening between North Macedonia and Bulgaria was toxic. That's definitely true. But you know, it's not the first time this happened. So there are many historic issues. You know, if you listen what some European politicians, which are now getting into the certain governments, were talking, the issues could escalate also in Slovenian case. So this is what is important, is that we do keep solving these issues, as I said before, on the principles which are in place in European Union. On stage accession, I'm in favor of it, but there is a risk, because certain member countries are very supportive of this. This is, for example, Hungary, for specific reasons. What I don't want is, and what I expect with the candidates country status for Bosnia is to have an equal level playing field, and this would be also good for Kosovo, because I think that what we need in the future is that European Commission and European Union will need to engage more actively with the candidate countries. And I think that the moment for this is coming. What I'm worried on the other side is if the political elites in the candidate countries are ready for this kind, let's say, conditional intervention, because the tools are there. Methodology did change because of this, because there are some political decisions which have clear implications on the enlargement process. On the deepening, I would avoid connecting deepening of European Union with enlargement process, because this could become a vicious circle without clear end. And this is, I think, that the enlargement process should be enhanced. It should be more focused on conditionality combined with implementation. And if you were listening to me very carefully, this what I was proposed is only one stage, because we were talking about the stage accession. This is one in the field of judiciary, because the rule of law chapter is the most demanding one, and let us not forget, it is the only condition which is not negotiable at the end. If you don't meet the rule of law criteria, you cannot enter the European Union. This is why I'm in favor of stage accession in the economic, social part, but at the same time, we need to do a lot more on the rule of law and the democratic principles and values of the European Union.
Thank you very much. Mr. Steric, just very briefly.
Just one sentence. I think all of these issues, Ukraine, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, come down to the same thing. Is this political messaging to say, okay, we want to keep some kind of illusion of enlargement alive, to keep the presence of Europe on the ground, and to kind of preserve stability if it's possible? Or is it actually putting a real credible perspective on the enlargement, which can be only done through reforms. And the question is, on the EU side, actually, does EU want to be an ally in the process of the concretization of the region as well?
Thank you very much. As the moderator of this panel, I will take the liberty to conclude what we have discussed here. And my conclusion, at least, is that the EU enlargement in the Western Balkans is more important than it used to be, but all the challenges we faced before are still there. And it comes down to political will, both in the countries in the Western Balkans and the EU member states, to basically change the current situation and to move things forward. Thank you very much for being with us.